repeating something over and over again for a reason. Because we've been teaching you, if you remember, about how to build something, right? How God builds things. You guys asked me to do Genesis, and that's what Genesis is about. It's about building something brand new. And up until this point, if you remember last week, we came to the firmament, remember? And there was what was above the firmament and what was below the firmament. And if you remember, this was the letter Vav, which means it was like a pillar of light or a separation. Remember we showed you the Aleph, right? The waters above and the waters below. Okay? Now the rubber's going to hit the road, where you are actually going to learn to actually have something get created. All right? It's like, you know, when you decided that you're going to build a business of some kind, or you're going to build a house, you have to get it from the plans to actually having hammer and nails. You know what I mean? You've got to start building the house. And that's what's about ready to happen. So all the plans have been laid. Now it's time to start building. And all the building happens below the firmament. That's where you and I live right now. Everything above the firmament, you can only understand it through the spiritual realm. And there's very little here about that spiritual realm. It only goes up to about verse 6, I think. All right? I think so. Yep. Verse 6 and 7. Verse 7 and 8, I'm sorry, in Genesis. So, in order to create, let's see if we can walk through it again. We're just going to quickly walk through it. All right? First of all, God, you have to think of something, right? You have to imagine it. You've got to be able to imagine it. Who has an imagination in this room? Is it wild?
At times.
I would imagine it is. I can just imagine. I can only imagine.
Great song, by the way.
We're in Genesis chapter 1.
Chapter 1.
Imagine that. We've been in here for over a month.
Wow.
Okay?
6 and 7 verse.
All right. So that's where the firmament is. But we're walking from Genesis 1. We're going to get to the firmament. I'm just walking through it one more time so that we know the steps. All right? So you have to have an imagination. God imagined, He thought of you. And throughout all the Bible, you can find scriptures about how He knew you before you were born, how you were with God since the beginning of time, that you are an eternal soul, right? So we know that who we really are, our consciousness, has always been with God, right? Then the second thing you have to have, right, is that the earth was without form and void. What happens? And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the deep. What happens? You took your imagination, right? What you were thinking of, and now what happens? That's the seat of emotion, spirit, right? We learned? And what happens? You're blowing that imagination upon the water. Just like the waves begin to form. All right? When the waves form, you know how when the wind blows on the sea, it begins to form waves. The bigger the wind, the bigger the waves. That's the more emotion that is going across the water. Okay? So you have to have that. And then the next thing is what were the waters, remember? What was the water? It was your consciousness, right? And there's 3 kinds of groups. Remember the groups that water represents? It represents collective consciousness, which is, you know, like right now we're, well, let me give you an example. On 2000, who remembers 9/11? What was the collective consciousness after 9/11? Well, in America, what was it? What was everybody doing, the whole entire country?
On guard.
Well, not only on guard, but they also became very patriotic.
Yes.
Remember everybody was flying the American flag and stuff like that? Didn't last that long, but they became patriotic. That's called collective consciousness, where everybody is in that same vein, in the same thought process. Okay, the other one is what? Personal consciousness, right? Right? Personal consciousness, that means that you are a conscious human being and you know that you're alive, right? So you have a certain kind of consciousness, right? And then the third one was
Spiritual consciousness.
That is your consciousness. Can you give me a bucket of consciousness?
Hold on, here's some hot sauce.
It's all spiritual.
Get some hot sauce.
Get some hot sauce. Anybody remember? Because I'm trying to remember.
I gotta bring my book so I can take notes.
Where would it be?
Where would it be?
Is it in here?
I don't know, it's in here.
God consciousness.
God consciousness.
Right? God consciousness. So his consciousness, his thoughts are not our thoughts, are they? His ways are not our ways. He's a different kind. So we have a collective consciousness, we have personal consciousness, and we have God consciousness. Okay? And so once that consciousness moved upon the waves of the water, what God said, what? Let there be light, and there was light. So he spoke light into existence. And where did he speak that light? Where? Upon the face of the waters. When the Spirit of God was moving upon the face of the waters, there was light. What is light? You remember?
God himself.
Is it the sun?
No.
What is it?
God himself.
God himself? Well, if he was already there, did you think he needed to speak light? If you remember, the word is or.
Or.
And the reason why it's called or,
Reflection?
no, the or is the light of instruction, or the light of inspiration. So suddenly you have a thought, and all of a sudden now you've been inspired, right? When you have an inspiration, Mary, what happens? You get all excited, right? And all the waters are turning inside of you. Whether it's a negative or a positive inspiration, we get inspired. All of us are in the same boat. It's part of our personal consciousness, right? Suddenly you feel alive when you have that consciousness happen to you, right? Suddenly that spark is inside of you. That's what it is. In God consciousness, it becomes what? It becomes that God all of a sudden is excited. You follow me? And what happens to the excitement is, where is that light happening? It's happening upon the waters. Because where does water come from? Do you know when it was created?
It was always there.
It was always there. Why? Because it's consciousness. Right? It was always with God. This is not water like you and I think of water outside. This is consciousness. Because this is the water that's above. If it was solid water above, they'd have to have a huge dam up there to keep that water from coming down, don't you think? Stay up there because we don't want to drown.
Supernaturally it was.
But it was consciousness. Below it is what? The waters below become congealed, which is where we're going to go in a few minutes. All right? It actually starts to come together and create water, like you and I understand water. Okay?
So Father, light is or?
Light, the light of God here is or. On the fourth day, God creates the sun and the moon. You know what they're called? A meteor. It's a different kind of light. The meteor, you know what a meteor is?
Yeah.
It's where the water comes from. It's a light, like a solid form of a light, like a lamp would be a meteor, or this lamp shade would be, this lighting up there would be a meteor. The light of understanding, or the light of instruction, or the light of inspiration is called or. When you read the King James Bible, or any kind of Bible that you can get in America, usually it just says light. You know what I mean? But there's more to it when you read it from the original text. And that's why I think it's important that we learn that, because we're learning about how to be inspired. We're learning how God can use the inspiration in our lives to inspire us. Okay? So what happens? Now God sees it. What happened? He spoke it, the light, let there be light, and God saw the light. It's important that we see that. Because if you cannot see it, that means that when you see something, you're measuring it. Did you know that? You're checking it out. When you see something, you are measuring it. And what are you measuring it by? Most of the time by our own understanding or our own parameters that we have. It may be right or it may be wrong, but we're measuring it. These are what we're laying down are these are principles that no matter what you do in life, you have to follow. Are you seeing that? These are universal laws that are created. And the reason why we want to know these universal laws, we study the scriptures and we study our own lives. If we're missing one of these universal laws, what happens? Things aren't going to work out. So if you can't see it, right? Look at this, what it says here. Walk by faith, not by sight. So if that's true, how can what I just said true? If you can't see it, then it can't be real. If you can see it, then it can't be real. Because this walk by faith, not by sight, is a lower underneath the firmament, and being able to see something through the light of understanding is here. Are you following me now? So there's different kinds of ways you got to look at it. Okay? So so you got to be able to see it, and then once you see it, what happens? God called the light day, and then in the darkness He called night, and the evening and the morning on the first day. What was that? Anybody remember? No? What is light? Is this light and darkness like if the light went out? We're still above the firmament, aren't we? So this is spiritual darkness and spiritual light, right? What are they? What would you call that? I'll give you a clue. If you turn off inspiration, what do you have?
Nothing.
So so light and darkness are actually conditions, number one, but number two, they are your controls. You know how you're constantly in light and in your mind, you're constantly in and out of light and darkness all the time, constantly, aren't you? Right?
Yes.
And those are your controls. You need to learn how to work with the light, right? And understand the darkness. It becomes your control in life. You wonder why when you go out in the day and yet you're facing trials and tribulations over and over again? Because God is using those trials and tribulations to teach you how to live where? In the light. By using what? Darkness. What do we want to do with the darkness in our life? Kick it out. We don't want it. I hate it. I can't stand it. I'm miserable. Right? The reason why is because if we can learn to overcome the darkness, what happens to us? Light will shine in your life. So your whole life on earth is what? It's a trial and tribulation. And the only rest you get is between trials. But when you understand that, and you don't get overwhelmed by it anymore, and you realize that you are not your problems, that your problems are their own thing, and God is using them to train you to be in the light, then what happens? Well, it says in Revelations, for those that overcome, you will be with me where? In the kingdom of God. For overcomers. Do you need to overcome things that are good? Do you?
They're really good.
They're already good. You have to overcome things that are trials and tribulations, right? Why is it that you find that some people in life have certain illnesses constantly, or they have certain problems over and over again? Ever look at your own life, what happens? You see that you go through something constantly over and over and over again. Because that one thing in your life, or whatever it is what God wants to work with in your life so that you can become an overcomer. Maybe you have a problem with anger or with fear, unmitigated fear. That means that you cannot, no matter what you do, you can't control it. But when you see it, when you can concentrate on it, and you look at it for what it is, what happens? You're able to overcome it. Most of us don't want to go that place because we'll have to take responsibility for it. What do we normally do when we face darkness in our life? We blame it on everybody else. Which brings us, I'm quickly going through this because I want to get below the firmament, brings us to the next thing, is what did God does? What does He do? And God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters from the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. So what happens here is now there's a dividing force. You see that? This is where we ended last week. We're at that dividing force. You have what's above and you have what's below. Who remembers how I described that line?
Like looking at a lake.
Like looking at the lake? But it's a mirror. Remember we brought you to Job chapter 38, verse 17, I think it was. Anyway, it talks about the what they call a rakia as a mirror, like a mirror or a molten mirror. So really what you're seeing is a molten mirror. This is important to understand because not only is it like a molten mirror, but it's more like, remember when you were a kid you played with a kaleidoscope? And remember how that all the same shapes kept, you know what I mean, if you change one little piece it went through the entire thing? Or a hologram. If you cut a hologram, what happens, Seth?
What?
If you cut a hologram, say in 4 pieces, what happens?
Disappears.
Can't cut a hologram.
You can't cut a hologram because why? All it does is the same picture emerges every single time. Correct?
It's a projection.
No?
Because in a hologram, there is a, I just figured you're the most scientific guy in the room. Hologram is a repeat, no matter how small you cut it, a hologram, the same picture emerges of the whole. It becomes a piece of the whole, but it's the same as the whole. I don't have a hologram, so I can't show
It's a
you.
projection.
Yeah, but it shows you that there's inside the whole, you can cut it up and you'll find that you're going to get more and more of the same. Alright? You live, oddly enough, in a hologram. The reason why I'm bringing this up, because as we get to the below the here, you're going to see how you can affect your world. How prayer affects your world. How when you finally understand that you're living in an illusion and what we're seeing is really not real. I know that sounds crazy because I know that if I cut your finger off, you'll be screaming. And you'll say, that's real.
Then I'll have to cut yours.
Yeah, then you'll want to come after me.
Mano,
Right.
mano.
So, what we're going to see now is as we go, the firmament then is like a mirror. So what we're seeing is like the matrix. Above the matrix, what we're seeing is that we are actually the mirror image of what is real. Are you following me now? We are actually the image. Doesn't God say that He made man in His image and His likeness? Everything below the firmament is an image. Jesus, who came to the earth and was crucified, He was the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creatures. You follow me now? So in actuality, we are living here. But what we believe is we live down here. Okay? I'm going to leave it there, and I want to give you some simple things to understand with that. So now, we're below the firmament, right? So this is, if you remember, above is the inner walk, below is your outer walk. Our inner walk is reflecting our outer walk. Everybody understand that? How do I affect my inner walk then?
By what you do.
You know how your inner walk, you have these thoughts? Do I know what's going on in Brother Andrew's mind? I can guess by the looks on his face. Puzzled. Right? That's what's going on inside of you. We all have an inner side, don't we? Do you have an inner inside? An inner thought process? All of us do. Seth does. We have this inner process that's going on. That's what this is. Now, in order for it to manifest, it has to come here, and it has to be real. You can't live here all the time. And what happens is that you're going from here to here constantly. Did you ever notice that? When you think about it, as I'm talking to you, you realize that you're constantly going this way. Right? Constantly, back and forth. You're running and returning, running and returning, running and returning. Alright? So now let's go below the firmament and start seeing how things start to form. Are you ready? We went through the steps again? Everybody caught it. Do you think you could do it? Do you know you do it every day? You don't even realize it? The problem that we have is we do it every day, but we don't understand this, the mirror. And the reason why we don't understand the mirror is because we've been living, you know, if you ever meet these people that, how about those poor girls that were in Cleveland that were stuck in prison for like, I don't know how many, like 10 years
That guy?
by that guy.
Yeah.
What happened to them?
They were free.
Well, they were freed, yes, but during that 10-year period, they became used to their environment. Did you notice that? And one of them actually became the guy's friend. Because they got so used to their environment, what happened?
That's what they
That became their reality. Well, what happens to you? Your environment becomes your reality. And so you become so used to it, when someone says to you, that's not reality, what happens? Are you crazy? This is my reality. You know, you see a bird. How many of you have ever owned a bird? What happens to a bird if you keep them in a cage long enough? And then you take them, open the cage up, what
It
happens?
stays in the cage.
It wants to stay in the cage. And you take it out of the cage, what happens?
Flies right back in.
It flies back into the cage. You know why?
It's conditioned.
Because it's been conditioned. There was an old experiment that was done by I forgot the scientist.
Ivan Pavlov.
What?
Is it Ivan Pavlov? With a dog? Oh, okay.
No, Ivan Pavlov was a dog that with the
No, he did this when he rung the bell, the dog would solve it.
yeah, that was another experiment.
Okay.
This is one with the elephant.
Okay.
When the baby elephant was chained, I don't know, I mean I've read the story. The elephant was chained and then was chained for many, many years. And then after a while they took the chain off.
He stayed right there.
And he stayed right there because he thought the chain was always there. And so he was so conditioned that he would never leave his environment.
Same as your dogs. You walk your dogs on a leash. Years and years and years, and then you take them off the leash, they won't go further than what that leash let them go. Because
Yeah,
they've been
except for
conditioned to
Katie.
go that far.
Katie, we have to run her down. But you follow me? That's the way we are. That's our conditioning. And that's why we have a hard time in our life. Because we've been conditioned in our life. Our mental conditioning has caused us to stay put. To not go past our conditioning.